All right, welcome everyone to our last session of the day. I think we can go ahead and get started with our session Failing Forward, presented by our very own Senior Director of Student Affairs, IACP, Susan Voss. So in this session, we'll share some tips and tricks for turning a no into a not yet. Now to create strategies for growth and resilience in times of struggles. So we're hoping that you'll be able to build resilience and cultivate the mental strength necessary to navigate challenges with confidence. So if you have any questions throughout the session, as per usual, put them in the chat or the Q&A box. If we're not able to get to them, you can always come chat with us in the Pharmacy is Right for Me booth afterwards. But without further ado, Susan, I'll let you take it over.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And thank you everyone for sticking around for our last workshop of the Pharmacy School Virtual Fair. I hope you've had a wonderful experience the past 2 days, and I hope you've been able to talk to as many people as you possibly can. I love to just start this out by having us think of, have we ever experienced failure in our lives? And I suspect that that answer is yes. Everyone experiences setbacks on their journey. And so today, for the next half hour, I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we fail forward? How do we fail in a way that we can learn and grow from that experience? So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me. I did my undergrad pharmacy school and my first year of pharmacy residency at the University of Tennessee. I grew up in Tennessee, originally from Middle Tennessee area. I then decided to branch out and move to South Carolina, and I did a pediatrics residency at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. And then I spent some time back in Tennessee working at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital as a pediatric clinical pharmacist. I worked in the hospital setting, taking care of critically ill patients, neonates, up to adolescent patients. We monitored drug levels, did discharge counseling, and had a great experience working there at Vanderbilt. And then I ended up moving to Iowa and became a professor at the University of Iowa, where I spent a big portion of my time teaching pharmacy students and enjoyed that experience there. And then, as Danielle shared, I've now moved on to a professional organization where I work for the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy. And so I tell you that to just share that pharmacy career journeys can be varied and you can pivot and change as you go about your career in pharmacy, but it's always been a very rewarding experience. And I always like to share that in all of my jobs, I've worn many different hats and had many different roles. So, as a pediatric pharmacist, as a professor, I also spent some time as a university administrator, working in student affairs and experiential education roles. And I put my cowboy hat here because it felt like the Wild West at times. I also now work in association management. That's kind of my fun hat because this work that I'm doing right now is really fun. But in all of those positions, I've worn the hat of a leader. And in any pharmacy position that you take anywhere, that's probably a hat that you're going to be wearing most of your career because as healthcare providers, we're leading our patients and our community toward better health. But again, my favorite hat to wear is my mom, wife, sister, friend hat. And so it's always important to just keep that perspective wherever you are and whatever you're doing. You've got that personal life as well. And so in this session today, we're going to learn some strategies to reframe perspectives and try to normalize failure. And then secondly, I'm going to share with you a framework for growth through goal setting, action plans, reflection, and evaluation. So I think it's important to keep in mind that in many situations, we're afraid to fail. And in those situations, it's important to keep in mind that failure is where we learn. Failure is how we know we're pushing ourselves to the peak. Failure is okay, but it's important to know how to manage it when it happens. And I love this phrase, there are no peaks without valleys. It's important to keep in mind that there are many struggles that we might experience in our career. As I think back on my experience in pharmacy, I've learned that there are lots of peaks and lots of valleys. And today I'm not going to talk to you about some of my failures that I experienced, but I'll share with you that I took organic chemistry 3 times as an undergraduate student. I did not get an interview at my top residency choice spot. My GPA was not high enough. I did not get that interview. The first time I submitted a manuscript for publication, I got a rejection letter on Christmas Eve. That one hurt a little bit. But it's all these valleys that we all experience. These things don't make it onto social media. These are not things that we post about, but you have to always keep in mind the things that we do put out there, those peaks don't ever occur without the valleys. So what I'm going to do today is share an experience that I've had learning a new skill and learning something that was challenging. And I'm going to share about experiences of failure with that, but also share how I managed through that experience. So, a few years ago, my husband and my oldest daughter decided to go get their scuba certification. And they wanted to be scuba divers. And they went to Puerto Rico, got their scuba certification, and they loved it. They loved their experience. And the next thing I knew, they were talking me into getting my scuba certification. Now, I am someone who doesn't really like animals all that much. The idea of breathing underwater terrified me. It's kind of a big fear. And also the fear of getting eaten by a shark. But my fear of missing out on these great experiences with my family was bigger than my fear of breathing underwater. And so I thought, let me just give it a try because I remembered, hey, I can do hard things, right? There are no peaks without those valleys. So I spent some time learning to scuba dive. Um, there's a couple of things that happened along my journey of learning to be a diver. I had some very anxious moments, especially the first time I was in a swimming pool having to go underwater and experience what it's like to sit there in 3 feet of water in a swimming pool and breathe. And that was pretty terrifying. But I want to share with you sort of how I managed to get through those experiences. So, as I think about sitting in a valley and being experiencing a challenge that seems very significant, I like to say these are 3 things to remember for the rise as you're rising up to your peak and overcoming your challenges. So, there are 3 basic steps in this process when you find yourself in the valley and you're faced with a really big challenge. Breathe, listen, and go. So I'm going to start by talking about breathe. So, breathing is one of the first skills you learn how to do underwater, not just learning how to use the equipment, but how to train your mind and your body to tell yourself that all you have to do is breathe. So, this presentation is really better if I can be in person, but the first thing I want to show you is the sign for breath because when you're underwater scuba diving, you can't talk. So, you have to figure out signs. So, the first sign I learned is the sign for breathing, which is just putting your hands to your mouth. The second sign you want to learn is okay. This means okay. And so, anytime you are underwater and you get nervous or I get nervous, I do this sign and tell myself to breathe. And let me tell you, it works for any situation. If I'm giving a big presentation and I'm nervous, the first thing I do is breathe. This gives me a chance to pause, reflect on everything that is that I know and provide myself some confidence and recall how to get through the challenge. And I feel like it works anytime. So when you're underwater and you can't speak when you're learning to scuba dive, you learn the signs, like I said. So you also learn signs for animals, which is really cool because when you're underwater and you see some cool animals, the guide wants to show them to you. So you learn signs like turtle. I think you maybe can see that in the screen. Barracuda is um, I think my screen might be frozen, but barracuda is this sign. Trumpet fish, pretty common to see, like you're playing the trumpet. Lionfish is another favorite one that you might be able to see when you're underwater. And then, of course, shark, right? This sign for shark. So the first time I dove out in an open the ocean, we're with our guide, and I'm going in underwater, and I think, okay, we're with this group. my guide's here. We've got this. I'm ready to go. And we all get underwater, we descend, and the first thing the guide does is a sign for shark, and he holds up the number 2. And I am just terrified, completely panicked. Okay. So I'm thinking, this is the end. We're going to get eaten by these 2 sharks. Do we go up? What do we do? And instead, everybody start swimming toward the sharks. All right. So I'm thinking, first rule is breathe, right? So I'm breathing. And then the second rule is listen. All right. So I'm underwater. I'm scared to death about these sharks, that there are 2 of them that are right there with us while we're diving. And in the pause, I look around and I learn and I rely on my network. So at that moment, I see the guide swimming toward the sharks. I see everyone else swimming toward the sharks. And I thought, okay, maybe these sharks are going to be okay. And turns out they were very friendly sharks. They were just reef sharks. They are very commonly seen and nothing to be panicked about. In fact, those 2 sharks followed us along our entire drift dive as if they were little puppy dogs following us along on a walk. And so by the end of the experience, I thought, okay, these sharks are going to be okay. So the first thing I did was breathe. The second thing I did was I listened. Rely on your network. So in pharmacy school, you're going to be building these incredible networks of people around you, your professors, your mentors, your classmates. That's your network. Those are the people that you rely on when you are faced with a challenge, you're not sure what to do. Rely on those people around you and that network that you're building with trusted colleagues and advice for others. So I also want to point out, though, that if you pause and you breathe and you listen to your network, but you recognize the challenge is bigger than what you can handle for yourself, consider getting help, right? The professional kind. So it's important to keep that in mind anytime you're faced with a challenge. So a really great book that I love is called When Things Fall Apart, Hard Advice for Difficult Times. And the one quote I love from that book is nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. And what I love about that is it's important that when things come in front of us, if when we're faced with challenges, there's something that we need to learn, there's something we need to get through. And I truly believe that some of those experiences, sitting with that discomfort and learning what you need to know so that you can grow. We are conditioned to not be comfortable when things get tough, when things are painful, when things are a struggle. But I can tell you in professional school, things get hard. There are struggles that we experience. And it's important that we don't try to numb it with things like scrolling on our phones, alcohol, substance misuse, medication, work. Those things can numb the pain, but it's important to sit with that discomfort and think, what do I need to learn from this? Another author and blogger who I really admire is Glennon Doyle, and she has a great quote. It's first the pain and then the rising. So it's important to remember that in those struggles and in those challenges, we may experience pain, but we will experience a rise and um, be able to achieve our challenges. The third step in my 3-step process when things get tough is to go, right? You eventually have to act. When I was underwater and panicking about sharks, and I was breathing and I was looking at everybody around me, seeing what other people are doing, they swam toward the sharks. And eventually I decided that was important for me to do, swim towards the sharks. But what I can tell you is when you do your scuba training, it's a lot of steps. There's education outside the classroom, there's um, pool dives, there's open water dives where you've got a instructor with you. And there were lots of times when it was really challenging. One of the hardest parts of learning to dive is that first step that you take into the water. You're weighted down with a giant tank of air. You've got weights on you. You've got usually wearing a weight belt to keep you down in the water. And it seems like just the opposite of a good idea to jump in the water if you are strapped on with weights and things that are really heavy. But you take a deep breath, you put your mouthpiece in your mouth, and you take that step off of the boat. And often in life, when we're faced with challenges and obstacles, we have a choice. We can stop or we can move forward. And there are certainly times that we need to stop. We might need to pause, breathe, gain some skills or knowledge so that we can be successful in our pursuits. There are times that we need to pause and listen to others, find a therapist, get professional help, build some skills, take a pause to even reconsider priorities. But then eventually you have to go and you have to move forward. So, taking that step off the boat becomes one of the most difficult challenges in, at least for me, in scuba diving, is taking that first jump. And many of you right now, you're considering taking that leap of faith by going to pharmacy school and investing 4 years and a large amount of money to increase your skills and increase your um, knowledge and your experience so that you can become a pharmacist and care for patients in your community. And what I can tell you is in scuba diving, it certainly is worth it to jump off that boat because I've been able to have so many incredible experiences with both of my daughters. My youngest daughter is now also scuba certified. And so we're able to have these incredible experiences as a family. And I think I'm so grateful that I was able to overcome those challenges and lean into that discomfort and step off the boat. So I just want to always point out that there is beauty in the valleys. So anytime that you're experiencing one of those challenges where you feel like you're in the valley and the mountains around you seem so large, keep in mind there's beauty in the failures. This is where dynamic growth occurs as students, as human beings in life. And so, what I want to share with you and spend the next few minutes on is a little bit about a process that we have taught students in pharmacy school, and it's called continuous professional development. And it's a process that is a very well studied stepwise process to get yourself out of those struggles and understand what you might need to do. So it's important to keep in mind, as I've said before, you will fail, you will face challenges. Here's how to find that beauty in the valleys. So, this is a four-step plan that's called the continuing professional development process. And you can start anywhere in the circle, but I always like to start by talking about the first square on the left-hand side, which is reflect. So, anytime you've experienced a failure or a challenge in your life, reflect. So, this is that breathe moment, right? Breathe. Look back at what you've experienced. Really dig deep into what happened, what was the cause of it, how did I get myself here? This is a time when you would listen to others, think about, reaching out to mentors, getting their experience, their feedback on what happened. The next step in that process is to think about a plan, right? So trusting your instincts at this moment. You've experienced that challenge. What are some baby steps that you can do to move up that mountain and get closer to the peak in your life? Trust your instincts. Talk with your mentors and your network that you're building now while you're a student and when you're in pharmacy school, and create a plan. I always find comfort in a written plan because it makes me feel good if I know, okay, here's the stepwise approach. Here's how we might be able to do this. And then, as it aligns with what I've shared before, you got to go and do it, right? You got to go act out on the plan that you've created. Don't spend so much time creating your plan where you let perfect be the enemy of good. Sometimes, if your plan is not perfect, people get stuck in that space. And they say, I can't move forward because I don't have everything quite exactly figured out. Sometimes you have to just trust yourself and move forward because you know that your plan is good enough to keep going. And then, lastly, once you've taken action on whatever it is that you were hoping to do, you want to look back and think, okay, how did that go? What are things I could have done better? What went really well on that dive? What could I have done differently to improve that experience? And that's something that we've built into all of our, every time I go diving with some of my friends, at the end of the dive, we always ask ourselves, hey, how did that go? Did we do okay? How was our communication underwater? Should we have stayed closer together or further apart? When that current got really hard to swim through, how did everybody do? And so it's important to always look back after you've acted on your plan to think, how could we have made that a little bit better? What went wrong? What went right too? It's important to sit there and celebrate the wins and celebrate those positive moments. And so this plan, the continuing professional development process, you can just keep doing this process. So once you've evaluated, you can reflect again on your experience, plan to do it again, and keep going around this cycle as you're learning new skills and developing yourself as a student pharmacist. It's important to keep in mind that you are the greatest project you will ever work on. Restart, reset, refocus as many times as you need. Just don't give up. Keep that in mind when you're in those struggles and when you're in those hard times as a student pharmacist. What I can tell you is, as a former student pharmacist, I went to school about 20 plus years ago. There were certainly times when things felt tough and there were struggles ahead, but I was fortunate to have a framework to think about, how do I move forward in these moments when things are feeling tough? And it's important to keep in mind that struggle is okay. It is okay, and it's actually really good to struggle through moments, because that's where some of the most dynamic learning will occur in your experience as a student. So thank you all for spending the last 20, 30 minutes or so in this workshop. And I'll look to Danielle, but I'd love to open it up for any questions you might have, or comments, or things you'd like to share in this experience. But I'm happy to take any questions that you might have at this time.
All right. Yeah. Feel free to put any questions and comments in the chat. We have one comment so far. This person says, I took general chemistry 2 times. Organic chemistry, surprisingly, was where I fell in love. My GPA isn't the best. I also have to retake the organic chemistry lab because I refused to use anyone's data from the 2 labs I missed because of registration complications.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know if you want to speak any more, Susan, to that resilience part, because it sounds like this person has quite a bit of
Yeah.
resilience to keep
I
going.
would I think so. I mean, I think we all figure out points in our career where things are tough. And once we learn through those, and I love that you went ahead and just took general chemistry a second time because you needed to learn that material, and then move forward to organic chemistry. And it sounds like that's where you fell in love with science. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And I will also encourage you to share that in your application to pharmacy school, because keep in mind, programs are going to see your entire transcript, your entire academic experience. And it's important to share with people looking at your application to pharmacy school, these are some points where I struggled, and here's what I learned about myself in that process, because that will really go a long way when people are reviewing your application to pharmacy school. If they can see that, hey, this candidate, this applicant really learned from their experience, now they may know how to study better. They may know how to study with a group and rely on others. So thank you for sharing that experience with us.
Do we have any other questions? I'll pause here if you all want to put them in the chat. I have a quick question for you. When you said you took organic chemistry a few times, was there any point, or I guess if you reached a point where you were like, I don't know if I can do this again, what did you tell yourself to keep going?
That's a great question. So, yeah, taking organic chemistry multiple times was certainly not the best point in my life. But I think I was really focused on, I knew I wanted to become a pharmacist. I My grandmother was a pharmacist, and I had a few family members who were pharmacists, and it was something that I just stayed focused on, that ultimate goal. I also was able to sort of tell myself that I was still learning, even though my grade didn't reflect it. Maybe I wasn't learning the content, but I was learning how to study. I was one of those students, and it's pretty common, I think, when I talk to students, didn't really study in high school, got through the first couple of years of college, didn't really have to learn how to study. And then organic chemistry like hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like, oh, I've got to actually study, and I've got to go to office hours and I've got to go talk to my professor. I'd never talked to a professor before in my life in college until organic chemistry. And so it really took sort of building some of those skills that I just hadn't had to build yet. And so I think what got me through was just remembering that even though the grade did not look like I was learning the content, I reminded myself I was still learning, even though it may not be reflected in my actual grades. And I do think I did a good job explaining that when I was applying to pharmacy school because you do have to share, they can see your whole transcript um and even when applying to residencies, I was still having to show my undergraduate transcript and I would address it, you know, head first and say, look, here's you're going to see this on my transcript. And this is what I learned through that experience. And I learned how to be a better student because of it. And so I think it's important just to keep focused on that. I think probably if I had to, um, I don't know how many times I would have been able to take organic chemistry, but the finally, being able to get through it that third time that I took it, I don't know if I had it in me to do it much further than that. But it is important to think about at what point do I change course? And you
Mhm.
can do that by talking to your network, relying on people around you to say, should I keep going? Should I keep doing this? And luckily, I had people around me. I worked in a pharmacy, and the people that I worked with were saying, just keep trying. You can do this. And so I think that was really helpful to have supportive people around me.
Awesome. We have some great comments here as well. One person said, I retook organic chemistry 3 times as well. It wasn't until my master's where I learned it was okay. There's always a story behind a grade. Thanks for this session. Thank you for that comment. Another person said, yes, I'm having to learn how to study, and it's been difficult for sure. Absolutely. And then one person says, I have a question. I know some farm schools don't require a bachelor's degree. So my question is, what are some of their holistic views when looking into the resume of the ones without a degree? What do you suggest would make my resume stand out from those who already have a degree?
Mhm. That's a great question. I think a few things that can stand out are things like your experiences. So sometimes that might be life experiences, sometimes it could be work experiences. So if you're working in a healthcare setting, it doesn't have to be in a pharmacy, but if you have some sort of healthcare experience, that can be good. And then sometimes it can be the extracurricular activities that students are doing, but I know not every student has time to do those things. Many times you're working, you're going to school, and that's about all you have time for. And so I think making sure your work is aligning with something in healthcare can help you stand apart if you don't have that bachelor's degree when you're applying. But I would say there's, many students apply and get into pharmacy school that don't have a bachelor's degree. And so it's certainly not the norm. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But you also want to, think about your strengths. And I know there was a session earlier in our virtual fair that talked about kind of leaning into your strengths. And so it's important for you to think about what are your strengths and how can you promote that and show that to others. And if you're not sure what your strengths are, ask people around you, like what do you think I'm good at? What do you think I can promote or share with others? And be yourself. I think that's important.
Yeah. Got another question here. What about independent secondary research? I haven't gotten to a point of peer review, but how do I express this?
Yeah. So I think if you are looking to do some independent research, that's always great, but most schools don't require you to do research prior to coming to pharmacy school. Um, and so I think that's okay. I think anything you can share in your application about kind of what you've done as far as research, I don't think anybody's expecting that an undergrad student is going to have a peer-reviewed manuscript in a journal somewhere or an abstract published somewhere. If you did, that'd be great, but it's not something that schools are expecting you to have on the front end. You might have that while you're in pharmacy school. You might have the opportunity, but it's important to keep that in mind. If you can do research in a lab, that's great. But again, it's not something you have to get into pharmacy school.
Great. And I saw one more comment that said, I understand having to learn how to study. I didn't learn until I studied for my pharmacy technician certification.
Mhm.
And Susan, I was wondering, as you were learning how to study, what are some resources you used, or where did you go to figure out how, like, what study strategies work best for you?
Yeah, that's a great question because we didn't have Google and Chat GPT, and I didn't even have an email at that time when I was trying to learn how to study in organic chemistry. So, I relied on the people around me. So, friends that I had made, classmates sitting next to me. I remember sitting in organic chemistry for the third time, and I just had to I wasn't used to just asking someone in class if they wanted to study together, but I just had to. I was like, I have to do something different. I've got to go and ask some students around me if we can study together. And then I also relied on the TA hours, so relied on those. And then our university had set up times that you could go and talk with people about different study skills. And so I took full advantage of all of those where they would teach you study skills. And so you would go and meet with a group and they would share, these are different ways that you can improve your study skills.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of those great questions and comments. Thank you for that really great presentation. I think that's the perfect presentation to wrap up the virtual fair with. So thank you all for coming. We'll be hanging out in the Pharmacy is Right for Me booth until our expo closes in about 15 minutes. So feel free to come chat with us there or visit any of our other booths that are here today. Thank you again so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.